The reason I'm doing this video today is because it seems to be the only way I can get information out accurately without it being filtered and distorted by others. A recent article on the front page of the Seattle Times did not represent what I feel was the truth. My name is Rick Forschler. I ran for City Council last year, won by about 67% of the vote. I've lived in the community for around 32 years. I care about SeaTac. We've raised our family here. I've served in many different organizations in the community, and I believe the reason the voters put me into office was to help bring about reform in the city. So the Seattle Times recently ran an article which I believe had a lot of distortions of the truth. It made it sound as though there was some sort of anti-Islamic bias going on in SeaTac, either by the city council or the city manager or both. It's really not the case. The real story here is that certain members of the city staff have tried to overturn the outcome of the election, of the last election, for their own purposes. I believe that some of them are probably worried about too much change in the city. They may be worried about their jobs or the pay scales or whatever it is they're concerned about, and they're just trying to prevent the types of reforms that the voters put us into office to make. We hired James Donnie Payne as city manager in SeaTac for several important reasons. He has a master's of public administration, also a master's certificate in disaster preparedness. He has extensive leadership experience both in the private sector and in the military. And he, in my mind, one of the most important criteria, strangely, is the fact that he lived very close to SeaTac. Not in the city, but about as close as you can be, just across the street. But he lived under the flight path. He was more impacted by the airport than most people that are residents of SeaTac itself. And in my mind, that was a huge motivation for us to be able to use his personal experience dealing with impacts from the airport so that we could push back against the port who has abused and taken advantage of the citizens near the port itself for 2 decades. We also needed someone with a priority for reforming the city, and we felt Donnie was ideal for that position. In the process of the investigation at the city, as well as the articles that the reporters published, I provided them with information that they failed to include. And so I'm going to do my best in the near future to make sure that the public hears this so that they realize the truth. It's not what they've heard so far. For example, the investigator and the Seattle Times reporter both ignored the fact that there were other reasons, legitimate reasons, for GIS mapping to take place besides tracking or some kind of tactical map of Muslims. There was no tactical map. That was a term that was drummed up by the city itself, I believe, in order to discredit Donnie. And it had nothing to do at all with the real reason for mapping. For example, one reason for mapping comes from affirmatively furthering fair housing, which was implemented in about July of 2015. And anyone that has a community development block grant that comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development is required to map areas to show that there's not disproportionate impact on areas of poverty or ethnic minority. Can't identify those areas without mapping. Another reason is environmental justice, and that's essentially the same requirement from any federal program in the case of the FAA or the airport, that they have impacts, unequal impacts on areas of poverty or ethnic minority. That can't be done without mapping those areas. In fact, mapping of this sort is not unusual. We've used them in SeaTac before, and probably any municipality, city or county in Washington State that has CDBG grants, community development block grants, has similar mapping. Census data is mapped frequently by GIS systems. It's not unusual. I'd also like the citizens of SeaTac to know that the problems they elected us to solve still exist. It's going to take some time to bring about all these reforms, but we're dedicated to do it, and we will. We appreciate your support in the past. We're going to continue to need your support as we make these reforms going forward. Despite the distractions that are out there, please continue to have faith in us, and we'll solve these problems.